Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Dr. Margie Warrell. I'll tell you all about Dr. Margie in just a minute. Grace Under Pressure is that show which deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it from a leadership position, as you will definitely discover that Dr. Margie is, you do it with a common cause of bringing people together. Dr. Margie Warrell, welcome to Grace Under Pressure.
It's a pleasure to be with you, John.
Great. I want to tell folks all about you. You're a 5-time best-selling author, leadership coach, and Forbes columnist. You've got 25 years experience living and working around the world. When you say around the world, you really mean around the world. You're a native of Australia, live in the DC area now, but you have been every place from New Guinea to Singapore. So that's pretty extraordinary. And you grew up in a small town in Southwest Australia. So anyway, you're the mom of 4, as you say, and you're an advocate for women's empowerment, and you inspire others, including men, to live bravely. And that's the topic of your brand new book called The Courage Gap: 5 Steps to Braver Action. And we're going to explore that today. First of all, I want to just jump in. How do you define courage, Dr. Margie?
Thank you. Yes, I define courage as decision to take action in the presence of fear and risk, real or perceived. But it is a deliberate action.
Great. I love that. I have spoken about courage and written about it often. And the quote that comes to mind is several have said it, including John McCain, is always, courage is not the absence of fear, it's the management of it. I think FDR said something along that same way. So now I ask you beforehand, and I had never thought of it till just moments ago. Is courage expressed differently by men and by women?
Yeah. Well, firstly, John, I want to just break down 2 core dimensions of courage. So one dimension of courage is the management of fear. And the second is the willingness to act in the presence of the fear and the risk. And so I think there is a difference, and there's often a difference in terms of how women will exhibit courage and where they need to practice courage as distinct from men. Obviously, when we think of men, we often think of physical acts of courage and bravado more so than women. But I think for women, because we are so wired to take care of relationships and we can be loath to create discord, and also because often we're raised in environments where we lack sometimes the belief in ourselves to put ourselves out there, that I think sometimes it requires more courage for women to speak up and step up. But that means we're having to practice it more often as well. So there's obviously, this is all a generalization, but I think there's different ways we see men and women leaning in and being vulnerable.
Well, you have a tagline or attributed to your book, and I love it. And I think it ties in more to what you've just spoken about with about women and its fate. It says, "Be the kind of person who makes others braver." Do women facilitate that mantra better, do you think, than men?
Look, I'm not sure that women necessarily make others braver more so than men. I think I would want to be careful in characterizing it that way at all. I do think if we think about it, courage again is like it's reducing fear, and it's growing the person to take action in the presence of it. And so, I mean, obviously, men and women, we can all contribute to people feeling more afraid, and also to feeling more brave. And I think we have to always just be tuned into our environment. I think women naturally can be very tuned into their environment around them, and sometimes pick up on anxiety and unspoken fears that they can then speak to and encourage people. But obviously, all of us have the capacity to make other people feel braver and to help to quell some of the anxiety people might have when it comes to stepping in. And obviously, when it comes to people who are in leadership roles, that's a key thing that leaders need to be doing. They always need to be making sure people know that it's safe for them to speak up, to bring bold thinking to big challenges.
Great. Now I want to break it down a little bit borrow something that I think perhaps, or at least as I read it, inspired by Stephen Covey, and that's, what do you say when you say focus on desired outcomes rather than fears? How does that manifest itself, Margie? So,
Well, firstly, just recognizing, John, our brains are wired for safety and for certainty and for control. We as a human species wouldn't be here if our brains weren't exquisitely wired to be on alert for potential threats. And when there's a lot of research that shows, Daniel Cunningham's led the way with this, that actually we're twice as sensitive to what could go wrong, to what we don't want, than on what we want to make more right. And so, as I write in the book, unless we're really clear and committed to a positive outcome, a desired future state, our fear of an unwanted state is going to govern our decisions and direct the actions we take. And so we have to be really clear, what is it that we most want that exceeds our fear of what we don't want? Otherwise, fear is what sits in the driver's seat.
great. Now, I think there's a methodology here that you have, and you use a term, rescripting your narrative, and that gets beyond or helps us cope with being stuck or stress or living, quote, as you say, too safely. So, what does it mean to rescript a narrative?
Well, just recognizing all of us, every human being, we come into this world wired for storytelling, for making sense of the environment around us, for making sense of ourselves, the people around us, the world we live in. And often we can get caught, we're almost captive to stories, to belief systems, assumptions, labels that keep us, restrict the actions we take, restrict what we see as possible. Sometimes they can ratchet up our fear factor. They can magnify our perception of danger, but they can also have us failing to see in ourselves our full potential, our capabilities, our strengths, our ability to handle uncertainty and manage and navigate risks and deal with sometimes the failures that are inevitable if we're going to be living a rewarding, meaningful life. And so, I have a whole chapter in the book about how do we rescript the beliefs, which are the software of behavior, so that we feel braver in the face of what we've got in front of us and less afraid. And, it just starts by asking yourself, think of any challenge that you're dealing with right now, or any situation that isn't as you'd like it to be. It might be a problem person. It might be a circumstance in your work. And ask yourself, if you were bringing a lot of courage to this, what would you be doing that you're not doing? And what would you have to be believing to help set you in action for that? And often what we don't realize is we get caught rationalizing inaction. We get stuck with labels. We fear cast future outcomes. So we make ourselves feel too afraid to act. We tell ourselves, oh, nothing I'm going to do will make a difference. And so our stories shape our reality. They're not just descriptive and describing our situations. They're also generative. They create it, and they can become ultimately self-fulfilling prophecies. So I invite people, as a coach, I often say to people, what story would you need to be operating from? What mindset would you need to be operating from in order for you to step forward and deal with the situation you're in more effectively for bigger impact?
Now, I love the analogy of storytelling and wholly agree with you. But as you were speaking, I was flashing back to some conversations I've had with people, and they were telling me related to stories that as young people or in their upbringing, they were told, well, you're not college material, or I don't see you in this job, or maybe in their first work, things go wrong. So how do we reframe those defeats, or maybe they're not defeats, but things that were prejudice us?
Well,
is this part of the rescripting, Margie?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think just recognizing that all of us can be victim to those limiting beliefs, that maybe our parents said that things to us and they weren't trying to be malicious. It was just, this is what they saw. You're just not cut out to be a leader, or you're just not very good with technology. Actually, just last year, I grew up with my dad. He used to call me Bumblefoot. I was just not very coordinated and athletic. And I carried that, I internalized that label. Obviously, this isn't a workplace one, but a lot of us can internalize labels about ourselves based on something that someone said to us years ago that maybe was true at the time, but we're treating this as though it's a timeless, unchangeable truth. So last year I decided, you know what, I want to run a marathon. And I'd never run a marathon before, John. I'm not a natural runner, but I thought, I know that if I believe it's possible and I'm willing to put in the hard miles of training, that I can do this. And so that was the belief system. And I put in those miles, required discipline. Wasn't easy. It was definitely very uncomfortable. And last November, I crossed the finish line on the New York Marathon. But it's the same for people when they think to themselves, oh, I could never be a leader. Oh, I could never build a business. Oh, I could never handle. And I would say, just watch your language, because our language creates the house we live in. How we describe things can really limit the lens with which we view our lives. And I think just be careful on the words that you use.
Right. Well, I salute you for that marathon as one who ran for 42 years, and I have the knees to prove it. I never did a marathon, but you have my respect. But you said something interesting. As a leadership coach and as a professional, if I say to you, you're working with me, or you hear, I say, I'm good in my job, okay? And but I tell you, I said, Margie, just as you said, I don't see myself as a leader. What would you tell me?
Mm-hmm. I'd inquire about why that's the case. Like, what is the evidence that you have that backs up that? Because, of course, our brains are wired to find evidence that supports existing belief systems. So if you tell me, just like me, I'm not a runner, or, I'm not a leader, you're going to be looking for evidence that supports it. And you've probably accumulated a lot of evidence. See, I'm not very good at public speaking. I'm not naturally outgoing. I really don't like conflict, et cetera, et cetera. And often it's based on some mental model of what a leader looks like. And this is where the gender element can come in for women too. Like, we're raised, because every leader we ever read about in a book was male. And we're like, well, I don't look like that. I don't sound like that. I don't act like that. And so we have these negative comparisons that can trap us. And I go, I'm not. I'm like, okay, well, I'd like you to think of some leaders that don't fit those molds, and challenging people, their conception of what leadership is and their rules. And as I said, sometimes there's certain traits. They're outgoing, they're charismatic, they're funny, they're super smart, strategic, whatever it is. And of course, leadership comes in many shapes and forms. And while we are not all born to be trying to avoid being political here, Winston Churchill or Abraham Lincoln. We're not all born to be. There's different ways we can exhibit leadership, but I believe every one of us can lead at every level from every position. I see it as positive influence. And so it starts with yourself, and it starts with owning that you have the ability to impact positive change around you based on wherever you are right now. And I think when people can loosen their definitions and see themselves as, I have the ability to do that. Doesn't mean you want to be CEO. I mean, not everyone has the traits to be CEO, but it does mean you can be CEO of your own world, and you can really step in and, through that lens of wearing a leadership hat, be a positive force for others.
That's great. And you chose two of my very favorite leaders. And the reason I want to shine a light on them is neither were thought of as much as young people. Abraham Lincoln was essentially unschooled, definitely unschooled, and Winston Churchill was pretty much shunned by his parents and looked down upon by his father, who was eventually became Chancellor of the Exchequer. So I had much to live up to. But in other words, both of those gentlemen overcame great obstacles, and probably there were people around them that said more negative things about them than positive. And so I want to ask you something, because you said something interesting. When we have our mental models, we accumulate evidence to, quote, prove it. So if I'm saying, Margie, I don't want to be, I can't be a leader, and I have XYZ to prove it, how do I begin to dismantle that or stop adding such evidence? So.
Well, I would say look for evidence that contradicts what you're telling yourself, but even step back a bit further and getting clarity about what are the values that you want to define your life by. What's the highest good that you want to do? So just getting that clarity about, forget about whether you see yourself as a leader or not. Okay, but what are the values and what's the vision that inspires you, right? And we're all inspired by different things. Some people really, truly get a buzz and inspired about being the CEO of a Fortune 100, and others, that's not for me at all. So just recognizing we're all different, but having that clarity about your vision and values. And then secondly, okay, well, who is it that you need to be to live into that? And then sometimes that requires defying our doubts. It requires stepping forward and doing the very thing that little voice on our shoulder is saying, who are you to do that? You can't do that. You don't have what it takes. And I know myself, John, I grew up on a dairy farm in rural Australia. There was no one in my world growing up that was college educated, maybe the doctor in town. And my dad milked cows for 50 years. So I didn't grow up with role models of what was possible. It never occurred to me that I could be a leader. I didn't have any exposure to that. And so as I've gone out into the world, countless times, I've had to challenge my own, that little voice of fear and doubt that goes, who do you think you are to do that? And to do the very thing that it would be urging me not to do, and to defy that doubt. And what we know from psychology is that if we wait until we believe with 100% certainty that we can achieve the success we want, we could be waiting our whole life. We can't wait for confidence. We have to behave our way into believing. So I would say to a client that's like, I'm not a leader. I'm like, well, what's one small thing that you might do that a leader would do in your situation? I want you to think about Abe Lincoln. I want you to think about a leader that inspires you. Maybe there's someone in your company or someone you work for. What would they be doing if they were in your shoes right now? Well, they would probably go and have this conversation. They would probably advocate for this. They would probably set a boundary here or make a bold ask there. I'm like, okay, well, let's just pick one thing. And let's just break that down. And what could you be doing? What might that look like for you right now? And getting people to take action, because life rewards action. And every time we take an action that aligns with our values and our vision, we are casting a vote for the person that we want to become, for the leader we want to become. And start wherever you are with what you have. Start with a little tiny step and build from there. But don't wait for confidence. Don't wait till you know you can't fail. And too often we make excuses and rationalize inaction. We tell ourselves now it's not the right time. But I would say just step into the discomfort that's required for your own growth.
I love that. I like how you were so specific, and you anchored in values and what would you like to accomplish, and if you do, you're going to need to step forward and be this. But you said something interesting there. We said a lot of things interesting, but about this minimizing the doubt. But it's also what you were saying, and I'm losing my train of thought because it was so profound. But how do we? I've always looked at doubt as sort of a governor on ego, but it's good to have it, but don't let us become paralyzed. What is your perspective, Dr. Margie?
Well, thank you. Yeah, look, if people who don't doubt themselves, that belongs in the realm of serial narcissists. So not all doubt is bad. Before I go and, invest $1 million in a get rich scheme, I think a little bit of doubt of going, is this the best thing to do? That's not a bad thing, right? So just recognizing not all doubt is bad, and an absence of any doubt can be dangerous. But on the flip side, it sits on a spectrum. On the flip side, we all experience moments of doubt. The doubts themselves are not dangerous and they're not debilitating unless we give them power. I have doubts all the time before getting onto a stage to speak or writing this book. Can I write a good enough book? I'm about sharing it with the world. And it's about how much power do we give our doubts. So examine your doubts, put them under the light. Like, okay, where's there a nugget of truth here? But also, where might this doubt be shortchanging me? Where might this doubt, if I let this doubt sit in the driver's seat, where's it going to steer me? And am I happy with that? And my experience is that we all have doubt, but we've got to be careful about how much power we give our doubts. And I've seen so many incredibly capable, creative, talented people with so much to give, with enormous value to add, held back because their doubts are pulling invisible strings, because their doubts of, do I have what it takes? Am I educated enough? Am I smart enough? Am I old enough? Am I young enough? You name it. And those doubts really we don't only shortchange ourselves. I think we shortchange everybody else of who we could be and the good we could do. And so, yes, a little bit of doubt is helpful, but don't let your doubts dictate your future.
It's a powerful thought. Now I remembered what I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about the power of, you were factualizing things, and it reminded me of the 80-20 principle. And if you wait for 100% of the data points, it'll be too late to make a decision. So in a sense, the 80-20 might work, or even 50-50. So I'm just trying to throw a quantification in there as give people a handle. What is your perspective on that, Margie?
Well, I once heard it said that Jeff Bezos makes decisions based on 70% of the information he'd like to have. In other words, he's 100% likely that the decisions made are not optimal decisions. But by making a decision, they're moving forward. And by moving forward, you're getting feedback. And so if you're taking that feedback and learning, then you're still advancing. In fact, you're going to be advancing faster than others that are waiting until they have certainty of exactly what to do. And I think if I'm answering your question correctly here, I believe it's so important for us to be careful not to let what's called our certainty bias, our desire to know exactly what we should be doing, to know exactly the impact of every action. And often that desire to have certainty can keep us from taking the very actions that would give us more information, that would allow us to move forward and actually create more certainty for ourselves over time. And I think right now, obviously, we've got a brand new administration in the White House. There's a lot that there's going to be changing. I mean, I live just outside DC. So there's a lot of people like, what's the future hold? I don't know. I'm like, don't wait until you know. Part of the future is already here. Just be taking action based on what you know. Be thoughtful about things. And don't let your fear of what could go wrong keep you from taking thoughtful, considered actions to make things more right.
Great. As you have a thing about embodying courage, and I want to dovetail it with another point, and it's the power of presence. How can we use our presence to project courage? What would you say to that?
Well, I just want to start with a quote that I once heard, that is that God had a dream and he wrapped your body around it. And it just resonated with me because I feel like our bodies are these earth suits, right? And I subscribe to the belief by Pierre Lachadin, who said, we're not so much physical beings who have a spiritual experience, but spiritual beings who have this physical experience. Now, whether or not you subscribe to that or not is beside the point, but we all have this physical element to who we are, and our fear often embeds itself in our bodies. And the smarter you are, the more tempting it can be to be intellectualizing emotions and living from the neck up. And we're not connected to our own bodies fully. We're not fully occupying and inhabiting our physical presence. And anywhere that we see tension in the body is inviting attention. The therapists say, you know, our issues live in our tissues. So just recognizing that fear can live in the body, and it gives us a target for intervention. And so bringing this around to courage, embodying courage. You know, there is the psychology of fear. Like we feel emotions whether we want to or not. And often they show up in our body. Tight chest, you know, tight shoulders, you know, butterflies in the belly. And being able to reset our nervous system and really occupy our full physical presence helps us turn the psychology of fear into the physiology of courage. And something that I'll sometimes do myself, or I'll do with people around me if they're really anxious, is just getting them to stop, to take a breath, to come into the present moment. And the present moment, our fear always lives about anxious thoughts of the future. So when we're really connecting to our breath, we're reeling in that fear, occupying our bodies and connecting to what I call our inner brave heart, because the courage we admire in other people, whether it's Lincoln or it's Angela Merkel or it's the firefighters who've been going in to homes in LA and rescuing people, any of the courage we admire in others, it also lives in us. It may just not be very developed, but it lives in us. And by being able to really embody courage, we bring, you know, stand tall, shoulders back, lift your chin up, you know, our whole physiology, our way of being, that actually helps us bring our full presence to the people we're speaking to the decisions we're making. And I think the most impactful speakers and communicators are really fully embodied. They're inhabiting their bodies fully.
A powerful thought. I like your turn of phrase, turn the psychology into the physiological as it applies to courage, and think of in the present, because our anxiety comes from what's next to the future. So I could go on with you, Margie, for another 3 hours, but your time is precious. But as you know, I ask every guest a story about grace. Do you have one you'd like to share with us? So
I do. I write about this in my new book, The Courage Gap, and that is around in 2020. I had a whole series of difficult circumstances in the beginning of that year. That I was living in Singapore. I was on the other side of the world from my children, and I was pretty anxious about how to get back to the United States, where I had children that had no homes when all the dorms closed because of COVID. And I had to I was on my knees and I was praying, oh my God, I need a miracle. And over a fairly short amount of time in September of 2020, a whole series of miracles happened that opened the pathway to moving back to the United States, because I wasn't a citizen. And I share that now because I think grace always lifts us higher. It flows to the lowest place, but it always lifts us higher. My mother embodied grace. It's something I seek to embody, but I also believe we can tune into that force of grace around us by simply getting present to the power from which we were all created.
that is a wonderful thought about grace coming into us and then enabling us to do things. And glad things worked out, and glad you are in the States where you would like to be. So, Margie, the name of your book is The Courage Gap: Five Steps to Braver Action. How can we find you and the book?
Well, I welcome people to pop over to my website, margiewarrell.com, and also the book. You can learn about the book there. I create a video trailer, but it's on Amazon. It's wherever good books are sold. I invite people to take the Courage Quiz, which is going to be going live when the book launches on the 28th of January. So I look forward to connecting with people. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Margie Warrell. I have learned much from you in this short half hour. Thank you for sharing lessons from your new book, The Courage Gap. And with that, we will go out. So.